Hi, welcome to another episode of Creative Careers, where we interview people from all different arts-related careers from all over the place. And today we are going to be talking with Dennis McNeil, who is an opera singer. Hi, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah. Nice to be with you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, just to give us a starting point. What exactly does an opera singer do in general? What kinds of jobs do they pick up? And maybe specifically, what have you done?
That's a really broad question, but if you were to dwindle it down to a real specific of what an actual opera singer does, um, they perform in musical productions that are fall under the category of an opera, as opposed to like a Broadway show. There's a slight difference. Most operas don't have dialogue, and if they do have dialogue, it's all sung. So it's usually a completely musical, non-spoken kind of form of music. And you would think of an opera as basically like a play or a television show, but everything is sung accompanied by some form of music, usually an orchestra. So an opera singer is a character or plays a part in a chorus or a lead role, just like you'd have on any kind of a production. And there's lots of different kinds of opera singers. There's lots of different kinds of opera singing styles, but there's different categories for higher or lower voice people. Like the soprano and mezzo soprano are the women singers, being the soprano is the highest and mezzo soprano lower. A male high singer is tenor, and the guy that sings the low voices is the bass. But that's essentially, and what we do is we rehearse a lot, and when we actually perform, we go on the stage in stage makeup and in costume of whatever our character is, and we become and tell a story from the stage. That's basically it.
Awesome. So let's start by talking a little bit about your journey. When were you first interested in music, and when was it clear that opera was the path you wanted to go?
It's a really interesting, I could give you a really long answer. I'm known to be very verbose, but I'll try and get right to the point. Basically, I had maybe 4 months of piano lessons in fourth grade, and that was about it for music exposure from my own learning side. But I was surrounded by music to a certain extent, in that my mother and father listened to great music, and we did go to some music performances, and then I knew a few music people, but I didn't really have much exposure to opera. I didn't personally become interested in music specifically until it sort of found me in college. So I was actually 20 years old before I really got into it. And once I did, it was, well, I'll tell a quick story. I took a music class and another music class, and I got to a point where I wanted to get credit for these classes in the context of part of my degree, and but there was this requirement for a music minor as opposed to a music major, that required 2 units of performance. And so I went to the counselor and I said, how do I get around this part? I don't play anything, thinking I don't play an instrument. And he said, can you sing? And I said, I don't know. I sing in the car to the radio. Sent me down to the choir director's office, and had me audition for him. And he said, so this is the choir director, the chorus director, said, what would you like to sing? And I said, I don't know. So he had me sing Happy Birthday. We all know how that goes. And I sang it in a few different keys. And he said, well, I'll just stick you in the bass section so you can get your credits and get on with your life. And everything changed from there, because I was just blown away by, here I was surrounded by music. And I ended up going to Europe with that group in the summer of that same year, and we were performing in a cathedral, and actually we were rehearsing for the performance, but a smaller group started to do their rehearsal, and so I had a little bit of a break, and I wandered around the cathedral as they were singing a specific song. The song was Shenandoah. It was a classic American folk song, and the way that music filled the cathedral with sound, it was like being surrounded by celestial beings. It was so magical. It was so mystical. I physically was affected to the point where that was like a turning point for my entire life. It all goes back to, right, I could almost take you to that church and show you right where I was standing when it happened, literally. And I kind of said, this is what I have to do. I have to do music. And they didn't even have opera. I went to UC Davis, not too far from where you guys are. And I just kind of made up my own major, and I started singing on my own, learning stuff. I got my own voice teacher, and I basically graduated from UC Davis with a general music degree. But my plan from there was to become an opera singer. And that journey began after college. And I just started learning with piano coaches and voice teachers, and pieced it together. And probably 11 years, almost to the day, from that first day in the chorus, or even that audition in the professor's office singing Happy Birthday. 11 years later, I was standing on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera singing for a full house.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd love to dig a little bit into what makes opera unique among other music careers. It is, it's got music and it's got it's got theater. So what makes opera specifically different from especially maybe musical theater?
That's a really, really good question. The difference between opera and music theater, kind of the short answer, is that music theater has dialogue and songs. So it's a storyline of a set of songs that are strung together with dialogue in between to tell a story. An opera is entirely sung. There are operas that do have dialogue, but for the most part, that's sort of the difference. There are operas from back, like in the days of Mozart and his contemporaries, that do have dialogue. So you have a full orchestra and songs in the story, and then in the dialogue places, they're still sung and to a tune, but they're conversational and accompanied usually just by a harpsichord. So it's kind of distinguishes between the two. In the grand operas, it's one beautiful melody and song followed by another beautiful melody and song, like Puccini or Verdi. There really isn't dialogue as much as there is all hummable, singable melodies. But what makes an opera singer different than a musical theater singer, or not even the person, but the style? Because I sing musical theater, I sing opera, I sing pop. So I sing Sinatra, I sing Billy Joel, I sing Rolling Stones and Beatles. But as an opera singer, when I'm singing opera, it involves the whole body, and it involves more diaphragm support. And the best way to describe it is it's really a relaxed, open throat, more acoustic production of sound. So if you're singing in a musical, it might sound more like you're speaking it. And if you're singing in an opera, it definitely sounds like you're singing it. And there's no separating it. You're going, oh, I'm big and I am. Oh. And also, they go to the limits on opera. There are climactic notes that you have to be really in good shape physically and well trained to be able to produce the tones and hit those notes. I like singing musical theater because I don't have to be as in shape and fully trained, which is, I haven't performed in an opera in a number of years because of that. I've gone a different route with my career, but that's a whole other story. Does that help?
Absolutely. Actually, tagging right off of that, I want to talk a little bit more about what were some of the specific musical skills that you really had to work on. Especially, I mean, you came into this very new to to singing at all. So, what were some of the things that specifically for opera performance you had to really work on for that?
For me, it was high notes. As a tenor. As an opera singer, in the chorus, I started out as a baritone. Then I auditioned and got a baritone solo. And as I graduated and went out into the opera world, I was singing baritone parts and learning baritone parts. I auditioned for one particular production here in Los Angeles of The Magic Flute for Papageno, and the music director, listening to me, she said, well, I could potentially give you the role of Papageno, but she kind of looks at me and she says, but I hear a tenor in there. So that started a whole process of going back to my voice teacher, and I did become a tenor and had to go through sort of a transitionary phase of doing that because it's a higher tessitura, higher range of music and notes to sing. And so for me, the challenge was really the upper end of that. And really what makes a tenor great is their high notes. They call them the money notes. We don't talk about Pavarotti's low notes. We don't talk about Bocelli's low notes. We talk, excuse me. We talk about their the color and tone of their voice and beauty of their voice, but then we talk about, and that note that he hits, that one note. We could sing thousands of notes, but we sit there and we wait for that one note. So for me, that was probably the biggest challenge was figuring out and also accepting what my limits were. I never really had a high C, and I had a really traumatic audition in Florida one time for a whole panel of people and an audience. And the auditor said, don't you have anything with high notes? And I said, well, just about every piece in there has a B flat. And he said, no, I mean something with a B or a C. And I looked at him and I said, I don't have a B or a C. And he kind of looked at me like there was something wrong with me. And it was an unfortunate situation for me, and it took a while to kind of recover from that. But once you learn your limits, you can be more comfortable with what you can do.
Can you give us, maybe tell us maybe your proudest moment, your greatest accomplishment, something that you're like, yeah, that's the highlight of all of this?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. The first way is in the context of you're talking to me as an opera singer. So that's a part of what I've done in my life. But probably one of the biggest highlights was there's a national competition of auditions that is done by the Metropolitan Opera, and they hear probably about 3,000 singers a year from all over the country, and in fact I think world. But the different regions then are narrowed down to a group of people that go to New York City and do a finals competition at the Metropolitan Opera. The first step of that is done in a rehearsal hall, and so they dwindle that number down to a final number of 10 people, who they refer to as national winners, and they give a concert at the Metropolitan Opera with the Metropolitan Orchestra and sold out audience, and it's on the radio and everything. And I won that in 1992. So as an opera singer, that, as well as I was doing a lot of leading roles, and I just have this one key memory of standing on the stage at the New York City Opera, which is also, it's at the State Theater, or it was, it's gone, but at the State Theater, which is kitty corner to the Metropolitan Opera Theater, all part of the Lincoln Center complex. But standing alone in my outfit as both Tamino in Magic Flute as well as Don Jose in Carmen, in front of the curtain, and all 2,500 people or whatever it is that fit in that theater are on their feet, and they're only clapping for me. And that's just huge. I mean, it's humbling because you don't know what to do. You know, you want to go out and thank each one of them or hug somebody. It's a phenomenal experience. So now I'm going to answer lifetime wise. The most incredible moment I've ever had in my life, other than having children and being a father, was that a year ago, this past March, on March 12th last year, I got to meet the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II. I got to meet her. I had a cocktail with her. We talked about music. We talked about singing. I then had dinner with her. It was a very intimate dinner of 20 people in London. This was at the home of the U.S. ambassador, a beautiful home called Winfield House, where the U.S. ambassador lives, whoever that is, through the years. And there were only 20 of us. And following dinner, we then went into the other room and I sang 6 songs for the Queen of England. It's hard to even explain how incredible something like that is. So that's the highlight.
That is a heck of a highlight. That's fantastic. As we close out, I would love to ask, what would you suggest for right now? This is being watched by a lot of students who can't leave their homes. They can't necessarily go out and take music classes, might not have those resources. What would be something that you would suggest that they could do in their homes right now today to build maybe at least one of these skills toward perhaps performing in operas someday?
Absolutely. And by the way, second to the Queen was singing with the Grateful Dead. So you know that I have a range of appreciation. That might get the kids' attention more than the Queen. Well, whether we're stuck at home or let's hope we're all get free from this interesting time in our lives, but it is great that we can have conversations like this in this way. Learn a language. I loved your question that you sent to me, what's the one thing? But I'd say that the two things are learn music, not just singing, but learn to play the piano proficiently. I wish I had. You guys are kids. You have all the time in the world now. Well, not all the time. You're busy. But, now's the time. And learn Italian, learn French, even learn Spanish or German. But learning that language will help you learn the other languages. Learning one language will lend to the next. Most of us in California, we learn Spanish just because that's what's offered as we're young. But Spanish flows really nicely into Italian. And I'd say Italian is the number one language you should know if you're going to do opera. And the pronunciation is very important. But then, if you play an instrument, any instrument, keep playing it. But if you can learn to play the piano on top of that, really will be helpful. Entertain and drive your sisters and brothers crazy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dennis, and talking about your life and your experience.
It is so my pleasure. And anybody that's watching this, I wish you guys the best of luck. And anybody that wants to ask me more questions, you can find me through all the funny little places. And I'm very open to mentoring and guiding. And I want to be as encouraging as I can to anybody that wants to do anything in the arts. And if it's an opera singer, you go for it.
Awesome. Well, that's another episode, folks. Thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to tune in again tomorrow at 1 p.m. for more Let's Be Creative arts content.